This thing is going to go so much higher that the only thing you need to do is how can I possibly stomach the inevitable volatility that's going to happen, and how much of a position can I take? If your number is 10% of your portfolio or less, you're probably thinking the wrong number. If you're thinking 1 to 2%, I mean, great. You've just seen the best asset of all times with the best catalyst for growth of all times, and you're coming up with 2%. What's happening with the other 90%?
Today's episode is brought to you by Akash Network, the world's premier decentralized compute marketplace. Check out Akash to buy and sell computing resources securely and efficiently. Purpose-built for public utility at akash.network. All right, everybody, welcome into another episode of Coinage. I'm your host, Zach Guzman, coming to you live from our Brooklyn studios here in New York City as Bitcoin crosses $93,000. Texas, it's a beautiful chart we're looking at here today, as a lot of people are wondering where we go from here, potentially, as we heard last week, as high as 110,000, 115,000 before the end of the year. How high can we go? Excited to have on with us today Fred Krueger, author of the Big Bitcoin book. Fred, thank you so much for hopping on Coinage, man. It's good to see you.
Great to be here, Zach. It's an amazing day.
It is an amazing day. To be honest, it's been a few amazing weeks as we've seen price action kick off here, kind of in an upward trend. A lot to dig into, Fred, but just for your background, you're a big investor in the space. You've been saying this was going to be happening for a while, I feel like. And what do you make of kind of the moves that we've seen so far?
I mean, the election changes everything, right? So it could have gone the other way. I think had we had a different outcome in the election, we might be looking at $50,000, not $100,000. So I think, we have the best of all possible worlds for Bitcoin right here. And this is like we just added kerosene to the fire, and the fire is going in one direction right now, which is up.
Yeah, when it comes to that too, I want to dig into it because there's a lot of potential regions, not just the election that people have been talking about, not just the Senate, not just the House, the Republican sweep, but also the idea of investors waking up to Bitcoin, the reflexivity of it all as money comes in through the ETFs, as well as Monster and MicroStrategy's purchases with Michael Saylor and kind of his levered bet there. I mean, when you look at the health of this rally and kind of the speed of it, maybe some people are saying, hey, look, I missed the boat already. But that's not the case if you've watched these things play out before, I don't think. So what are you kind of advising people as they wake up to this rally?
Well, I think let's zoom out a little bit and ask ourselves right now, where is TradFi's allocation to Bitcoin? And let me put it this way. There's about 47 trillion dollars worth of stocks out there, an equivalent amount of bonds, and 5 or 6 trillion of cash out there. And just in the U.S. alone, there's $100 trillion of financial assets. Bitcoin right now is a $1.5 trillion asset class, but of that $1.5 trillion, TradFi only owns about $100 billion worth, which is kind of the value of all the ETFs, which is about 1 million coins, and MicroStrategy, right? So in a world where they have $100 billion of it, but their total pie is $100 trillion, their actual asset allocation is 0.1%. And actually, it's less than that because Bitcoin's a global asset, and the U.S. doesn't have more than 1/3 of the total global pie. So we're looking at, something like 0.3% of allocation to this asset class. And I mean, we're going to north of 1% very quickly.
Yeah.
We're looking at $1 trillion coming into this asset over the next, let's call it 4 years. But it's, if this money's coming in, you don't really want to be the last guy in the pool. I think they always have this adage, you don't want to be the first guy in the pool, but you don't want to be the last. You certainly don't want to be the last guy in the pool either. you know.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point, and I also feel like we were just showing the ETF flows. Right now, it's about just for other
Yeah.
context because we have heard that, and I think it's a good way of kind of wrapping your head around how big can this get over the longer run. But just kind of giving some click points along the way as we see this rally accelerate, basically averaging about $2 billion in inflows into the Bitcoin ETFs a week now. It took gold ETFs about 5 years to get to the $20 billion in total net inflows. It took Bitcoin ETFs about 10 months. So that's 10 months versus 5 years. And Fred, I guess, the other aspect of that too, as I said, is it, begets FOMO buying and kind of the acceleration. To your point, you don't want to be the first person, you don't want to be the last person. But as we've seen, Bitcoin does go in cycles and in waves. I wonder what you make of, I guess, some of the leverage in this kind of run and if it even matters because,
It doesn't
potentially.
matter. It doesn't
Okay,
matter.
maybe explain that a
Uh,
little bit.
yeah. So I just think, look, the real yes, there's some leverage with MicroStrategy buying a little bit of. I mean, all the amount of money that's come into this market is inconsequential relative to the amount of money that's about to come into this market. It just doesn't matter. So, again, there's these big buckets of money in the world, right? So there's self-directed people going to their stock, their portfolio, their account at Merrill Lynch, and just clicking a few buttons and picking up some exposure to MSTR or one of the new ETFs. That's a third. You have
Hmm.
institutions like pension funds, retirement accounts, and things like that. That's another third. And then you have managed accounts where wealth managers are allocating on behalf of their clients. That's a third. And none of these things are, they're just like dipping the very top bit of their toe in the water. That's 1/10%. They are not involved yet. So, it's sort of like the dam there's a little bit of water, there's a little fissure in the dam, and
Hmm.
we're seeing some water drip through the dam. And we're going, oh my God, is this, how much is the entire dam is about to break. So, you're in, the looking at the chart of Bitcoin in the past, I don't think informs you very well as to where it's about to go. We are about to have a breaking dam moment, where TradFi has finally awoken to this asset, and number one, understands the asset, understands the opportunity, and number two, can now for the last 9 months invest in this asset. That the
Yep.
ETF is live. They can push a button, they can get exposure. So I think we have the catalyst for this move, which is the ETF. That's the necessary and sufficient condition. Before that, traditional finance, traditional investors couldn't buy Bitcoin easily. Sure,
Yeah.
they could open an account at Coinbase, but that's a very small percentage of people who are going to do that. Most people, they have their assets in a brokerage account or in a
Yep.
bank, and for them to wire money to this thing called Coinbase and buy Bitcoin it's a stretch, and
It is.
it's even more of a stretch to tell them you got to you got to put a private get a seed phrase, copy it down, store it in a safe, get a ledger, and and hold your own Bitcoin yourself. That's not going to happen for most
No,
people.
it's a
Most
very
people
it's
are
a very
not.
good point.
They're not going to do that.
No, it's a very good point, and I feel like also to extrapolate the point, I've been seeing your tweets recently, and one of them has to do with kind of, you're talking about investors there, but one of the biggest in terms of investors out there are countries. And, as we talked
Right.
about the Republican sweep here, the U.S., suddenly the idea of the U.S. coming out with a strategic Bitcoin reserve, which Senator Lummis has floated before, and we heard President Trump endorse as well, is no longer so far-fetched. And Fred, when you consider that, I'm curious to kind of get your take on what that means for things too, because everything you just said is obviously true. A lot of people aren't going to go through all that, and it's easy to buy an ETF. But now as the U.S. potentially steps in here, I mean, how realistic is that adding, as you said, fuel to the fire here?
Well, it's 100% realistic. It's 100% going to happen. Um, it is a promise that Trump made to us in Nashville, when I was in with all my fellow Bitcoiners in the actual physical same room with Donald Trump. when he made that promise. I was in the same room with RFK Jr. when he made that promise. We were in the same room with Senator Loomis when they made that promise. This is happening, okay? And you may be in disbelief that it's happening, but it is going to happen in, by, I would say, March of next year. So this is going to happen, and it's not just going to happen suddenly with like Congress fighting it. No, there's going to be talk of this thing right when Congress gets back to work on the 5th of January. So we're moving very, very quickly in a direction where we have a strategic Bitcoin reserve, where the largest entity in the world, which is the US government, is buying Bitcoin. And so if you're not buying Bitcoin and your government is buying Bitcoin, and you're sort of still on the Peter Schiff train that this is not real money, you got to go see a doctor, because obviously it's real if the U.S. government's buying it. So it doesn't matter how much the U.S. government buys.
Yeah.
The fact that we have a strategic reserve is all you need to know. That is all you need to know. And that means that if you're a company, your company needs to buy Bitcoin. If you're a country, your country needs to buy Bitcoin. If you're an individual, you need to start front running that as fast as you can, right? You just got the go ahead. So you need to start your allocation, whatever it is way too low, So that's the mental shift.
It is a mental shift, and it's a mental shift that's very difficult for people to make if they've only kind of thought about Bitcoin 10 years ago when it was still, volatility was much higher. I think, resetting it now that you got BlackRock scooping it up by billions on the daily, it's a little tricky to kind of reset your mental framework.
Well, volatility is going to be high. It's not going down.
Let's talk about that, though, because obviously we talked about long term, and I think a lot of people are in that boat. If you're a Bitcoiner, you've been in that boat for a while. But shorter term, Fred, and this is a much more difficult question, in terms of volatility being high now, I mean, how do people brace for that? Because you're saying, if this is something you could buy in an ETF, some people have this in their retirement portfolios, and it's fine. Just keep it there and forget about it. But for people who are kind of trading in the shorter term, what's Fred's call in terms of where we go? We had Sean Farrell on the show saying 115 by the end of the year. What do you think in terms of kind of shorter term? What the next few months are going to look like?
Here's the first problem is, if you think about trading Bitcoin, you're in the wrong. You've already said the wrong thing. Okay, you should not trade Bitcoin. Period. Full stop. Ever. Okay. Yeah. So the fact that you're asking about trading Bitcoin is wrong. This is probably going to be, it will be the best asset, the best performing asset of your entire life. And if you're trying to pick where it's going in the next 3 months, I have no idea. But this thing is going to go so much higher that the only thing you need to do is, how can I possibly stomach the inevitable volatility that's going to happen, and how much of a position can I take? Now, I would sort of say, if your number is 10% of your portfolio or less, you're probably thinking the wrong number, right? You're probably in the wrong zip code. Okay. So if you're saying 1 to 2%, great. You've just seen the best asset of all times, and with the best catalyst for growth of all times, and you're coming up with 2%. What's happening with the other 90%? You're just going to put it in the bank. You're going to put it in. You're going to put it in some dog stock, or you're going to just follow the trend?
Explain to me why you think volatility will be higher, because you would think about the maturity of this asset. Michael Saylor was on CNBC not too long ago. I think we have time to play just what he said. This little tiny clip, quick 45 seconds of what he said not too long ago when Bitcoin was at 55. He was on Squawk Box talking about where this will go. He talked a little bit about volatility coming down as bigger players come into the space. Here's what Michael Saylor had to say, Fred.
You buy Bitcoin, you hold it for more than 4 years, Joe. That's my advice to everybody.
For anyone, buy it and hold it for more than 4 years. And then you think eventually it takes how much, let's say it is digital gold, what percentage of gold's market cap does it finally?
Bitcoin's 0.1% of the capital in the world right now. I think it's going to go to 7% of the capital.
7%?
My long-term forecast is it's going to go to
700.
13 million over 21 years.
13 million.
13 million, but what is it 5 years from now? In your 4-year calculus?
It's been growing 44% a year with about a 40 to 50 vol. I would think it'll move on at 40%, then click down to 35, then 30, then 25, and at some point it'll be the S&P return plus 8%, and it'll be the S&P vol plus 8% because it's always going to be a more global, open, free capital market.
So that's what Michael said there in terms of volatility coming down eventually.
Yeah.
And,
So I totally agree with him. Like with his, look, at some point we're going to have a tsunami of, there's a tsunami comes first, right? Which is, we get this thing in everybody's portfolios. And then the question is, once we have this sort of phase shift of, that we're about to see in the next year, I would say, then we're going to start to see that volatility come down, and people are going to take advantage of dips and buy them. Mm-hmm. And more people are going to put money in, and we're going to have more steady eddy. But not now, right? Right now, it's exactly the opposite. Volatility over the last 4 days has been the highest it's ever been. Right?
Yeah, and I
also yeah.
I mean, look, I think we're on the same page here, and in terms of kind of thinking about this, certainly in terms of Bitcoin, where a lot of people are kind of trying to figure out what the hell's going on now is beyond Bitcoin. I don't know if you're kind of looking at the space there and saying it's worth kind of looking at ETH the same or Solana the same in terms of other things that are about to historically. Bitcoin surges first, then you got your altcoin boom, and we're seeing that with a few things now. How do you look at those opportunities, Fred, in terms of how people should think about those in relation to Bitcoin?
I'm a Bitcoin only kind of guy, but what I would say is I'm not saying they're all terrible. What I'm saying is the biggest opportunity right now and the biggest opportunity in your portfolio is Bitcoin. It's how much Bitcoin do you own? Now, I think the problem with all these other coins is you can get very distracted very quickly, right? You can say, well, what about Solana? Well, then what about, Avalanche? And what about Near? And what about Sui and Aptos? And, and you can spend the next month just getting lost in trying to understand all these different protocols. And if they're cheap or if they're rich or, you can spend all this time on that, right? But, I think that it's a distraction. What you really need to do is figure out the main question, which is what percent of the portfolio of your portfolio is in Bitcoin. That's the number one thing right now. I really, if you already hold these coins, I would actually sell them and buy Bitcoin. Personally, I would just simplify your life. I think we as humans, we like to overcomplicate things, right?
Yeah.
We love to trade in, we trade out, we find some new story, we like this, we like that. There will be time to reassess where we are. But right now you can get really cute and you can spend a lot of your time on other stories. And yes, some of them will outperform, but a lot of them will not. And most of them will not. And I think I find it very cleansing to just have Bitcoin. I find it's like a cleansing,
Yeah, spiritually and mentally probably as well, because I've dedicated a career to digging deeper into the rabbit hole, as we all have here at Coinage, and it does get very messed very quickly. And that is
if
true.
anything, I would just say, here's what I guess what I would sort of if you're asking me for my doctor's advice, I would say just make sure that 90% of your portfolio is pure Bitcoin. And then just look at the other 10% as like you're going to Vegas and you're going to hit various tables. You're going to go to the blackjack table. You're going to go to the craps table. You're going to place a yo bet. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. Think of it as entertainment and not investment advice. And if you want to go play it and just have some funds, and maybe you want to even buy some meme coins or something, I don't know. You know,
Yeah, it is
anything
true.
that will help you not sell that Bitcoin, it doesn't matter. And like honestly, if you lose it all, it doesn't matter. The 90% that you have in Bitcoin is going to bail you out, and maybe you're going to get lucky. Maybe you're gonna hit the next big thing, the thing that's going to outperform Bitcoin. It's
Yeah.
possible. There something will outperform Bitcoin. I don't know. I just don't
for
know
sure.
which one it is, and
It's
I would look at it as just pure entertainment. And you know what? Just sitting there and just watching the price of Bitcoin can get really kind of mind numbing. So maybe it's like it's a little bit of a spiritual. It's like playing Sudoku.
Yeah,
You
no, I
know.
mean, look, and there's a lot of people, by the way, what you're saying to someone who's not in crypto, describing Bitcoin as
Yeah.
playing Sudoku is probably blowing their minds, because that is true. But
Yeah.
for everybody else, I mean, this chart that we're looking at, we were talking about it this morning. Peanut the squirrel, we flagged this on Coinage when it was a $42 million market cap, now up at 1.6 billion. We got a 40 bagger, Fred, that everyone who reads our newsletter saw mentioned in that one. I made the mistake, as you just mentioned. Sometimes we overthink things. Sometimes we overtrade. I got out. I missed the
Look,
40 bagger.
as long as you keep the position size down and you look at it as this is the fun category. I mean, it is fun. Look, when I go to Vegas, I gamble. Okay, I know I'm not supposed to, but I like to hit the tables. I like to
Yeah.
play blackjack. I think we all do, right? And sometimes I'll do a little sports betting. I don't care. I I enjoy it. I like gambling, but I think we need to make the big bet, the big sizable bet.
Mhm.
Let's not put your children's retirement on Peanut the squirrel. Okay, that would not be a good idea.
Yeah.
If you want to put your lunch money on Peanut the squirrel, fine, go ahead, and maybe you're
Yeah.
going to have the thing. I don't know. I'm just not really focused on these things. So, I mean, I was aware of that one because it just kind of hit the meme verse, the Twitter verse, and I love the story of Peanut, right? So I think
For sure.
I was very heartbroken when Peanut was executed by the Democrats.
As we all
right?
were, by the way. R.I.P. Peanut. But Fred, I know you got to go, so I want to wrap on
Yeah.
this, because you mentioned
Sure.
how likely it was that the Bitcoin reserve moves forward. There's a lot of people that might say it's not going to happen just because of how razor thin some of these majorities are. At the very least, Trump can sign something himself and say the government's never going to sell the Bitcoin it already owns. So that could potentially be fairly easy. But for Lummis to say we want to buy 1 million Bitcoin and get that across the finish line, what has you so confident?
I mean, we are in all your past experience is not going to prepare you for what's about to happen. Okay, we it wouldn't have happened under the previous administration. Absolutely not. And
For sure.
had we not got this, but I feel pretty confident that you're going to be surprised on the upside here. You're going to be surprised that nobody's going to want to stand and filibuster this thing, and take the other side of this, because this is what cost the Democrats the election. Honestly, what cost the election was Elizabeth Warren with her anti-crypto army. That cost the Democrats the election. And honestly, they're going to do some soul searching, and I don't think they're going to fight this one again. They're going to pick different fights. That one was a very, very bad fight to make, and I think that's over. I think we're going to get to a much more crypto-friendly SEC. I think we're going to get to a crypto-friendly administration,
Yeah.
and I do think it's going to be bipartisan at this point.
Yeah, no.
You know,
I mean, it's been exciting to see that
they're going to
play out.
fight. They're going to fight the border. They're going to fight things like that. But I just don't see them fighting a Bitcoin reserve fund.
Yeah, it's been exciting to see. I mean, we've covered a lot of pro-crypto congressmen and women, and Richie Torres, a Democrat, perhaps one of the loudest now, getting a lot of applause from Democrats as well, saying that, look, crypto's here to stay, and he's led the charge on even challenging Gary Gensler as a Democrat. So hopefully more of that is seen here. We'll see what happens. But
Yeah, and Gensler's out now, so we're about to have a changing of the guard, and Blue skies ahead, my friend. Blue
skies ahead is a good way to wrap on this. Fred, your first appearance here on Coinage. Hopefully many more to come. Thank you so much for coming on with us today. Yes,
all right.
Thank you for the insights. We'll chat again soon.
Okay.
For Fred Krueger
Perfect.
and for everybody here at Coinage, I want to thank you for watching again. You can catch all the biggest headlines in Web3 at coinage.media and co-own the project with us, along with the co-founder of Netflix and many others. That's going to do it for us. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you again soon.